Clara Whitcomb was 42 years old the summer the people of Silver Creek Valley decided she had already missed her chance at happiness. They did not say it to her face at first. They said it behind flour barrels in the mercantile, beside church steps after Sunday service, and under their breath when she passed with her basket on her arm and her chin lifted just enough to keep from crying. They called her the spinster of the valley. Clara had heard the word so many times that it no longer struck her like a slap. It had become more like cold weather, something she could not stop, only dress herself against. She lived alone in a small, whitewashed cabin beyond Willow Bend, where the creek cut through the cottonwoods and the road turned narrow. She kept chickens, 2 milk cows, and a garden so neat that even men who mocked her flowers still came asking for onion sets, fever herbs, and jars of blackberry jam when their own pantries ran thin. She had never married. That was all the town cared to know. They did not ask why her wedding dress had stayed folded in a cedar trunk for 19 years. They did not ask why she still lit a lamp in the east window on storm nights. They did not ask why she looked away whenever a traveling preacher spoke of promises. Silver Creek had made its judgment long ago, and small towns loved nothing more than a judgment that saved them from asking questions. But by the end of that summer, one widowed rancher would learn the truth. And when the valley called Clara by the hardest name it knew, he would stand before them all and call her something kinder. The day everything began was hot enough to make the road shimmer. Clara had risen before dawn to gather eggs, pull beans, and wrap 3 loaves of bread in a clean cloth for Mrs. Hanley, whose husband had been thrown from a mule the week before. By mid-morning, she was walking toward town with her basket balanced against her hip, her gray dress dusty at the hem, and her hair pinned as plain as a schoolmarm's. She had almost reached the old stone bridge when she heard a cry. It came from the lower road near the creek, not a groan cry, a child's cry thin and sharp with fear. Clara stopped at once. Then came the sound of wood cracking, a horse snorting, and a man shouting a name with such terror that Clara felt it in her bones. "Annie!" She set her basket down in the grass and ran. Below the bridge, a small wagon had tipped sideways near the creek bank. One wheel had sunk into soft mud, and a little girl of about 8 was caught beneath a broken sideboard, her skirt tangled and one arm pinned against the wagon seat. The horse stood trembling in the traces, wild-eyed but still. A man was trying to lift the wagon alone, his face pale beneath his hat, his hands shaking so badly he could hardly grip the wood. "Stop," Clara said, steady and firm. "You'll bring it down on her worse." The man turned as if he had not known anyone else existed in the world. He was tall, sun-darkened, and broad from work, with grief cut deep around his mouth. Clara knew him by sight, Samuel Hart, widowed rancher from the Double H place north of town. His wife had died 2 winters ago, and since then he had been seen only at church, the feed store, and the schoolhouse when he came for his daughter. "My girl," he said, his voice breaking, "she's caught." "I can see that," Clara said. "You look at me, Mr. Hart, not at the wagon, at me." He stared at her, breathing hard. "Good," she said. "Now listen, I need you to calm that horse. If he pulls, the wagon shifts. If the wagon shifts, she hurts. Take his head and speak low." Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but one glance at his daughter's white face stopped him. He moved to the horse and caught the bridle with both hands. Clara knelt in the mud beside the child. "Your name is Annie, isn't it?" The girl nodded, tears running down her dusty cheeks. "I'm Clara," she said. "I need you to be brave for 1 minute, not all day, just 1 minute. Can you do that?" Annie swallowed and nodded again. Clara studied the broken sideboard. It had pinned the child, but not crushed her. The weight sat wrong, caught between the seat and the mud. If Clara pulled the board without lifting the corner, it might scrape Annie's arm open. If Samuel lifted from the wrong side, the wagon might roll. She looked around and spotted a fence rail lying beside the road, half buried in grass. "Mr. Hart," she called, "when I say bring me that rail, keep one hand on the horse and move slow." He obeyed. That was the first thing Samuel Hart would remember later. He had not obeyed many people in his life, but he obeyed Clara Whitcomb without pride getting in the way, because her voice sounded like a person who knew how to keep a child alive. Together, they worked the rail under the wagon corner. Clara braced her shoulder against the mud, set both hands to the broken board, and told Annie to turn her face away. "Now," Clara said. Samuel pushed down on the rail. The wagon lifted just enough. Clara pulled. The board came free with a hard scrape, and Annie slipped loose into Clara's arms, sobbing so fiercely that Clara held her close and let the tears come. There was blood on the child's sleeve, but not much. Her arm was bruised, not broken. Clara ran careful fingers over the girl's shoulder and wrist, watching her face for pain. "There now," Clara whispered. "You are not lost, you are not broken, you are right here with us." Samuel dropped beside them and reached for his daughter, but Clara stopped him with one hand. "Slowly," she said. "She's had a fright, don't grab at her like the world is ending." His face changed at that. Shame, fear, and thanks all moved across it together. He held out his arms gently. Annie leaned into him at once, and Samuel gathered her as if she were made of glass. He closed his eyes and pressed his cheek to her hair. For a moment, there was no sound except the creek water moving over stones, and the horse breathing hard in the road. Then Samuel looked at Clara. "I owe you more than I can say," he said. Clara stood and brushed mud from her skirt. "You owe me nothing. My daughter might have been badly hurt. But she was. You came running. Most people would." Samuel glanced toward the road above them, where two wagons had slowed but not stopped. One man tipped his hat and kept going. A woman leaned out, saw Clara, and quickly looked away. Samuel saw it. Clara knew he saw it. "Most people did not," he said quietly. Clara picked up her basket from the grass. One loaf had fallen out, and the cloth was stained with mud. She tucked it back in as if it did not matter. "Take her home," she said. "Wash the scrape with boiled water, keep her quiet today. If fever comes, send for the doctor." "Miss Whitcomb," Samuel said. She paused. It had been a long time since a man had said her name without pity in it. "How do you know all that?" he asked. Clara looked down at Annie, who was still clinging to her father's shirt. For one small second, something old and painful passed through Clara's eyes. "I have had practice keeping people alive," she said. Then she turned and walked up the bank toward the road. Samuel watched her go, his daughter shaking in his arms and his heart still beating too hard. He had heard the talk, of course. Everyone in Silver Creek had heard it. Clara Whitcomb, the spinster past Willow Bend. Clara the odd one. Clara the woman no man had chosen. Clara the warning whispered to young girls who read too many books and turned away too many smiles. But the woman he had just seen was not a warning. She was steady hands in a mud ditch. She was a calm voice when fear had made him useless. She was the reason his child was breathing against his chest. 3 days later, Samuel Hart rode into Silver Creek with a question burning in him. At the mercantile, Mrs. Bell was tying brown paper around a sack of sugar when Samuel asked, "What do you know of Miss Clara Whitcomb?" The store went quiet in that quick way. Small places went quiet when a name had history behind it. Mrs. Bell's mouth tightened. "Why do you ask about her?" "She helped my Annie." "Yes, well," Mrs. Bell said, pulling the twine too hard. "Clara does know how to be useful." A man near the stove gave a dry laugh. "Useful is about all she ever cared to be." Samuel turned his head slowly. The man looked down at his boots. Mrs. Bell leaned closer, lowering her voice as if kindness could be made from gossip if spoken softly. "She is not a bad woman, Mr. Hart, just a strange one. Had her chance years back and let it pass. Some women get proud, then wake up one day with no husband, no children, and only chickens to hear them speak." Samuel felt something hard settle in his chest. "What chance?" he asked. Mrs. Bell hesitated, pleased and uneasy at the same time. "Nathan Cole, handsome fellow, had land near Abilene, asked for her hand near 20 years ago. She sent him away. No one ever understood it." "Did she say why?" Mrs. Bell blinked. A woman like Clara does not explain herself. Samuel took his parcel from the counter. Maybe that is because nobody asked her right. He walked out before anyone could answer. That Saturday, with Annie beside him on the wagon seat and a sack of flour at their feet, Samuel turned off the main road and headed toward Willow Bend. Annie had begged to go. She held a small bunch of wildflowers in her lap, picked from the creek bank where she had almost been hurt, and she guarded them as if they were treasure. Clara was in her garden when they arrived, tying bean vines to poles. She looked up at the sound of the wagon, and her face gave nothing away. Samuel climbed down and removed his hat. Miss Whitcomb, he said, we brought flour and thanks. Clara looked at the sack, then at the flowers in Annie's hand. I did not ask for either. No, ma'am, Samuel said. That is likely why we brought them. For a moment Clara did not move. Then Annie slipped down from the wagon, walked to the garden gate, and held out the flowers. Clara's face softened before she could stop it. That was the first crack in the wall she had spent 19 years building, and Samuel Hart, standing in the dust with his hat in his hands, saw it. Part 2. After that Saturday, the road to Willow Bend did not feel as lonely as it had before. Clara told herself it meant nothing. People came and went from a farm all the time. A man might bring flour because his daughter had been saved. A child might bring flowers because children had soft hearts. None of it had to mean more than plain thanks. But the next Saturday, Samuel Hart came again. This time he brought a small sack of coffee and a coil of rope for the gate Clara had tied shut with twine. Annie came with him, holding a book from the schoolhouse in both hands. She asked if she could sit on Clara's porch and read aloud to the chickens, because her papa was tired of hearing the same story 3 nights running. Clara tried not to smile. The chickens have heard worse, she said. So Annie sat on the porch steps and read in a clear little voice while Samuel fixed the gate and Clara weeded the onion beds. The sun moved slow across the yard. The cottonwoods whispered over the creek. For the first time in many years, Clara heard another person's footsteps near her house and did not wish them gone. The visits became a quiet habit. Samuel never called it courting. Clara would have shut the door if he had. He came with nails for a loose shutter, then stayed to mend it. She sent him home with bread. He brought Annie when the girls' lessons were finished. Clara showed Annie how to gather eggs without frightening the hens, how to churn butter, how to tell when a storm was coming by the way the cows turned their backs to the wind. Annie took to Clara with the open trust of a child who had lost too much and was afraid to ask for more. She did not remember her mother clearly. She had only a few soft pictures in her mind, a blue shawl, a song near the stove, hands that smelled of soap. Clara never tried to fill that space. She only made room for Annie's sorrow without touching it too hard. That was what Samuel noticed first. Other women in town gave Annie pity. They bent close and told her how sad it was to be motherless. They pressed sweets into her hands and sighed over her hair. Clara did none of that. She handed Annie work she could manage and praise she could believe. You did that well, Clara would say. Not poor child, not motherless girl, just Annie. Samuel began to understand why his daughter ran ahead whenever they reached the Willow Bend Road. He also began to understand how much he had been living like a man holding his breath. Since his wife Martha died, Samuel had kept the ranch alive, fed his child, paid his debts, and gone to church with clean boots. Everyone told him he was strong. They did not see him sitting alone at night after Annie slept, staring at the chair where Martha used to sew. They did not see him burn supper because he forgot the pan was on the stove. They did not see him fold Annie's dresses with hands too big and clumsy for the buttons. Clara saw without making a show of seeing. One evening, when Samuel came to fetch Annie and found her asleep on Clara's settle with a quilt over her knees, Clara handed him a covered dish. Stew, she said. There is enough for tomorrow, too. I cannot keep taking food from you, he said. You are not taking it, I am giving it. He looked down at the dish, then at her face. Why? Clara went still. It was such a simple question, but simple questions often had deep roots. Because a child should not eat burned beans 3 nights in a row, she said. Samuel gave a tired laugh, then covered his eyes with one hand. The laugh broke into something close to grief before he could stop it. Clara did not move toward him. She did not touch his shoulder. She only stood beside him in the quiet kitchen and let him gather himself without shame. When he lowered his hand, his eyes were red. I miss her, he said. I know. Some folks act like saying that means I'm not grateful for what I still have. Some folks talk because silence frightens them. Samuel looked at her for a long moment. You do not frighten easy, do you, Miss Whitcomb? Clara turned back to the stove. I have had practice. There it was again, that small locked door inside her words. Samuel did not push, but the question stayed with him. Each visit showed him more of the woman the valley had flattened into a name. Clara had sharp hands and a soft heart. She could lift a feed sack, set a bone, quiet a crying child, and stand before gossip as if it were rain on a roof. Yet there were moments when old pain crossed her face like a shadow, then vanished before anyone could name it. The town noticed the visits too. Silver Creek always noticed. At first the talk was soft, a look across the church aisle, a whisper near the well, then it grew teeth. Mrs. Bell said Clara had found herself a lonely man and was making use of his grief. Mr. Turner at the blacksmith shop said Samuel ought to know better than to bring his little girl around a woman who had never had a family of her own. Two young women outside the schoolhouse laughed when Annie said she was going to Miss Clara's after lessons. "She is not your mother," one of them said. Annie came to Willow Bend that day with her mouth tight and her eyes wet. Clara found her behind the chicken shed, twisting her apron in both hands. "What happened?" Clara asked. "Nothing. That is a heavy nothing." Annie tried to hold it in, but she was only 8. "They said you cannot know how to care for me because nobody ever wanted you for a wife or mother." Clara's face went pale. For a moment she looked older than her years, not angry first, hurt first. That made Samuel, who had just come around the corner and heard every word, feel something fierce rise in him. He expected Clara to speak against the women. He expected bitterness. Instead, she knelt in front of Annie and took the child's hands. "Listen to me," Clara said. "People can be wrong for a very long time. They can be so wrong that the wrong thing begins to sound like truth, but that does not make it truth." "Did nobody want you?" Annie whispered. Samuel held his breath. Clara looked past the yard toward the cottonwoods. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. "Someone did," she said, "once." Annie waited. "But wanting is not always kindness," Clara said, "and a woman should not belong to a man who wants to break her down small enough to carry." Samuel stepped forward before he knew he was moving. Clara turned and saw that he had heard. Her face closed at once. "I should not have said that," she said. "I am glad you did," Samuel answered. But she would say no more that day. The truth came later during a storm. It rolled into the valley near dusk, black and heavy, with wind that bent the cottonwoods and rattled every window in Clara's cabin. Samuel and Annie had come to bring back a milk pail Annie had borrowed, but the rain fell so hard they could not leave. Clara made them sit by the stove while thunder shook the roof and the road outside turned to mud. Annie fell asleep in the chair, wrapped in Samuel's coat. Clara stood at the window, watching rain run down the glass. "Nathan Cole was not a good man," she said suddenly. Samuel looked up. She did not turn around. That is the part no one wanted to hear. He waited. He had land, money, a fine horse, a smile for church and a voice like honey when others were near. My father liked him. My mother did too at first. Everyone said I was lucky. Clara pressed one hand to the window frame. Then we were promised, and the honey left his voice when we were alone. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He told me who I could speak to, what I could wear, how often I could visit my mother when she took sick. He said once we married, my place would be in his house, not running back to a dying woman. He said my mother had already lived her life and should not cost him mine. Rain beat hard against the roof. Clara drew a slow breath, so I gave back his ring. Samuel's voice was low, and he lied. Yes, he told the valley he had changed his mind because I was cold, proud, unfit for a home. People liked that story better. It made more sense to them than a woman choosing loneliness over a cruel husband. She turned then, and her eyes were bright but dry. My mother lived 2 more years. I cared for her until the end. I do not regret that, not one day. But when she was gone, I walked into town and found that my name had been buried before she was. Samuel stood slowly. "Clara," he said, and there was such care in the way he said her name that she almost looked away. Before he could speak again, a hard pounding came at the door. Clara opened it to find a boy from town soaked to the skin, his face white with fear. "Miss Clara," he gasped. "It's Mrs. Bell's baby. Fever took him bad and the doctor can't cross the wash. Ma says you know sickness. She says please come." Clara stood very still. Mrs. Bell, who had carried the cruelest words in Silver Creek, was asking for her help. Samuel saw the hurt pass across Clara's face, then he saw it leave. She reached for her shawl. "Wake Annie," she said. "We are going to town." Part 3. The ride into Silver Creek was hard and dark. Rain slapped the wagon cover, lightning flashed over the hills, and the road had turned slick beneath the wheels. Samuel kept the reins tight while Clara sat beside Annie in the back, holding one hand over the child's shoulder each time thunder cracked above them. No one spoke much. There was nothing to say. Clara knew what waited for her in town. Mrs. Bell had been one of the first women to turn Clara's name into a warning. She had smiled in church and whispered in the mercantile. She had told young wives that a woman ended up like Clara when she thought too highly of herself. For 19 years, Mrs. Bell had helped keep the Valley's hard story alive. Now her child was sick, and Clara was going. When they reached the Bell house, the lamps were burning in every window. A horse stood tied near the porch, head down in the rain. Mrs. Bell opened the door before Samuel had even stopped the wagon. Her face looked gray with fear, and all the proud sharpness had gone out of it. "He is burning up," she said, looking not at Samuel but at Clara. "Please." That one word seemed to cost her more than a whole sermon. Clara stepped inside without answering. The house was too warm, the air thick with fear and wet wool. In the back room, Mrs. Bell's little boy, Caleb, lay in a small bed with his cheeks red and his hair damp against his forehead. He was no older than 5. His breathing came fast, and his small hands twisted weakly at the blanket. Clara set her bag on the table and went to him. "Open the window a finger's width," she said. "Not wide, just enough for air. Samuel, bring clean water. Mrs. Bell, find every clean cloth you have. Annie, sit by the stove and stay warm." No one argued. That was the strange thing. In a house where Clara had been mocked many times, every person now moved when she spoke. Samuel fetched water from the pump. Mrs. Bell pulled sheets from a chest with shaking hands. Annie sat still by the stove, watching Clara the way a child watches a lighthouse in a storm. Clara worked with calm care. She cooled the boy slowly, not too fast. She lifted his head and touched water to his lips. She wiped his face, his neck, his small hands. When Mrs. Bell began to cry too hard to help, Clara did not scold her. "Sit down," Clara said gently. "Breathe before you fall." "I cannot lose him," Mrs. Bell whispered. "I cannot." "Then keep your hands useful," Clara said. "Fear needs work to do." Mrs. Bell looked at her, startled by the kindness in the words. Then she took another cloth and wrung it out. The night stretched long. The rain slowed after midnight, but the fever did not. Caleb tossed and whimpered. Once his breathing grew so faint that Mrs. Bell made a broken sound and reached for him as if she could hold him in the world by force. Clara caught her wrist. "Not like that," she said. "Speak low, let him hear you calm." "I am not calm." "Then borrow mine." Mrs. Bell stared at her. Clara leaned close to the boy and smoothed his hair back. "Caleb, you stay with us now, you hear me? Your mama is right here. She is not leaving, and neither are you." Samuel stood in the doorway, wet hat in his hands, watching Clara fight for the child of a woman who had never spared her a soft word. Something in him changed forever that night. He had already respected Clara. He had already cared for her. But now he saw the full size of her heart, and it humbled him. Near dawn, the fever broke. It happened softly. Caleb's small body went still, his breathing eased, and the burning heat under Clara's hand began to fade. He slept at last, true sleep, deep and quiet. Mrs. Bell covered her mouth and wept. Not pretty tears, not proud tears, the kind of tears that come when fear lets go and leaves a person weak. Clara stood, tired to the bone, and set the damp cloth aside. "He will need watching," she said. "Small sips of water, thin broth when he wakes, send for the doctor once the road's clear." Mrs. Bell took one step toward her, then another. "Why did you come?" she asked, her voice shook. "After all I said, after all I let people say." Clara looked at the sleeping child. "Because he did not say any of it." Mrs. Bell bent her head as if struck. "I was wrong about you," she whispered. Clara picked up her shawl. "Yes." The word was plain, not cruel, just true. Mrs. Bell looked up, ashamed. "Can you forgive me?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the first pale light of morning touched the wet road. "I can try," she said, "but do not ask me to pretend it did not hurt." Mrs. Bell nodded, crying harder now. "I will not." Word traveled through Silver Creek before noon. By supper, every woman in town knew Clara Whitcomb had walked through a storm to save Mrs. Bell's boy. By the next Sunday, even the men at the blacksmith shop spoke softer when her name came up. It did not change everything at once. Old habits do not die in a single day, but the valley had been shown something it could not easily forget. The first public change came in church. After the hymn, when the preacher asked if anyone had a word to share, Mrs. Bell stood. Her hands trembled against the pew in front of her. "I owe Miss Clara Whitcomb more than thanks," she said. "I owe her truth. I have spoken wrongly of her for years. I repeated a story I never had the decency to question. She came to my house when my child was near death, and she brought him through the night. You may call her what you please, but you will not call her that old cruel name in my hearing again." The church went silent. Clara sat near the back with her hands folded in her lap. She did not lift her head. Samuel sat across the aisle with Annie beside him, and his heart ached at how still Clara had made herself, as if she were bracing for another blow instead of praise. Then Annie stood. "She saved me too," the girl said. Her small voice carried clear. After that, things began to turn. Men tipped their hats when Clara passed. Women brought back jars they had borrowed and stayed a little longer at her gate. Children waved from wagon seats. Nobody said the word spinster as loudly anymore, and when some stranger did, there was always someone nearby to correct him. Clara did not become proud. She did not go looking for apologies. She kept her chickens, tended her garden, baked bread for sick neighbors, and lived as she always had. But something inside her began to loosen. She no longer walked through Silver Creek like a woman crossing a river alone. Samuel kept coming to Willow Bend. He came in June to mend the chicken fence. He came in July to bring peaches from his orchard. He came in August with Annie, who had started leaving her school books on Clara's table as if the house already belonged to her heart. One golden evening, when the field smelled of cut hay and the creek ran low and bright, Samuel found Clara on the porch shelling peas into a blue bowl. Annie was inside, asleep on the settle with a kitten curled against her side. Samuel stood at the foot of the steps, turning his hat in his hands. Clara looked at him. "You are going to wear that brim out." He gave a small smile, but it faded quickly. "I heard a man in town call you that name yesterday," he said. Clara's hand stilled. "I corrected him," Samuel said, "but it stayed with me. How a whole valley can take one word and lay it on a woman until she starts carrying it like it belongs to her." Clara looked down at the peas in her lap. "Words only weigh what we let them." "No," Samuel said gently. "Sometimes they weigh what others keep putting on." She looked at him then. He climbed the steps and stood before her. "I have been thinking on a kinder word," he said. "One that fits better, not because you need a man to rename you. You do not. You have been Clara Whitcomb all this time, and that should have been enough for anyone." Her eyes shone, but she did not speak. Samuel swallowed. "But if you would have me, I would like to call you my wife. And I would like Annie to call this place home, or my place home, or any place you are, because that is what you have become to us." The bowl in Clara's lap trembled. For 19 years, the valley had called her unwanted. For 19 years, she had told herself she did not care. But the heart can learn to live without a thing and still ache when it is offered kindly. "I am not young," she said. "Neither am I. I have lived alone a long time. I know. I may not know how to be what you ask." Samuel knelt before her, his hat in his hands. "You already are." Tears slipped down Clara's face then, quiet and unashamed. From inside the house, Annie's sleepy voice called, "Papa." Samuel turned. Annie stood in the doorway, rubbing one eye. He held out a hand to her. "Come here, sweetheart." Annie came to the porch, looked from Samuel to Clara, and seemed to understand enough. She slipped her small hand into Clara's. "Will you stay with us?" Annie asked. Clara held that little hand and felt the last locked room in her heart open. "Yes," she whispered, "if you both want me." Annie climbed into her lap at once, nearly upsetting the peas, and Samuel laughed with tears in his eyes. They married in September in the little white church at Silver Creek. Mrs. Bell made the cake herself and cried when she brought it. The preacher spoke kindly. The town stood with bowed heads. And when he named Clara and Samuel husband and wife, Annie clapped before anyone else and made the whole church laugh. Later, as they stepped into the sunlight, Samuel leaned close so only Clara could hear. "They called you the spinster of the valley," he said, "but that was never your name." Clara looked up at him. "What is it then?" she asked. Samuel smiled, "Beloved." The word settled over her gently, not like a chain, but like a warm shawl after a long, cold night. Years passed, and Silver Creek remembered the story differently. Children were no longer warned about Clara Whitcomb. They were told of Clara Hart, the woman at Willow Bend who ran toward trouble when others looked away. They were told how she saved a girl by the creek, a boy in a storm, and a widowed rancher who had forgotten that life could still be tender. And when newcomers asked why the old folks spoke her name with such care, they were told the truth. The valley had once called her finished. It had once called her unwanted. It had once called her the spinster of the valley. But a widowed rancher and a little girl had known better. They called her beloved, and in the end, that was the name that stayed.